There's a particular kind of Sunday evening that most people know but almost nobody talks about honestly. It's around 9 p.m. The weekend is dying. Tomorrow is Monday. And you're sitting somewhere in your apartment or your house, maybe on the couch, maybe in the bathroom just to be alone, and something crawls through your chest that isn't quite dread and isn't quite sadness. It's something older and more specific than either. It's the sensation of recognizing, again, that the life you're living is not the life you meant to live. And the worst part, the part that nobody says out loud, is that this isn't the first time you've felt this. It might be the 400th time. You've sat in this exact feeling before, in other apartments in other years, with different details but the same gnawing core. And still, by Tuesday, you'll have metabolized it back into routine. You'll have swallowed it whole and called the swallowing being realistic. That is not a metaphor. That is a clinical description of what most human lives actually are. I want to talk about why, not in the way people usually talk about it. Not with a 5-step framework or a morning routine or a quote from someone who died wealthy and serene. I want to talk about the actual mechanism, the biological, psychological, almost gravitational force that keeps most people locked inside versions of themselves they outgrew years ago. Because I think most conversations about change are conversations about symptoms, and I want to try, for the length of this, to cut down to the root. I should tell you about my friend Marcus first. Marcus is 38. He was, for a brief window in his late 20s, one of the more genuinely talented documentary filmmakers I'd ever met. He had this instinct for finding the human element in any story, this patience for sitting with people, until they said the true version of what they meant instead of the rehearsed version. He made one short film at 27 that screened at 3 festivals and had programmers genuinely excited, and then his dad got sick, and then the savings ran out, and then he took a temporary job doing corporate video production for a pharmaceutical company in New Jersey, which paid decently and had health insurance, and told himself that he was going to save money and get back to real work within 18 months.
That was 11 years ago. Marcus still talks about his documentary ideas. He has 3 fully formed in his head, including one with a protagonist he's been following for 6 years, waiting for the right moment to commit to the project. He is good at his job. He is well liked. He goes to his nephew's soccer games on Saturday, and by any external measure, is a stable, functioning adult. And every Sunday around 9 p.m., something crawls through his chest. What's happening to Marcus is not laziness. That's the first lie I want to kill right here, because it's the lie that lets people feel superior to their own paralysis. The idea that the people who don't change simply lack discipline or courage or the right mindset. Marcus is not lazy. He ran a half marathon last spring. He reads obsessively. He is one of the more self-aware people I know, which is part of what makes his situation so instructive and so painful. He can describe his own trap with more precision than most therapists could, and it doesn't matter. The description does not unlock the door. What's actually happening to Marcus is something that the psychologist B.F. Skinner would have found it completely predictable. Not because Skinner was a pessimist, but because he spent decades watching organisms, human and otherwise, respond to the actual architecture of reward and punishment in their environments. Skinner's most uncomfortable contribution to our understanding of human behavior isn't operant conditioning in the abstract. It's the specific concept of negative reinforcement. And if you don't understand negative reinforcement, really understand it in your body, not just as a definition, you don't understand why most people never change. We think about motivation almost entirely in terms of positive reinforcement. We pursue things because they give us pleasure, reward, and satisfaction. This is true and real and accounts for maybe 20% of what drives human behavior on a day-to-day level. The other 80%, the part that actually governs most lives, runs on negative reinforcement, which means the removal of discomfort, the relief of anxiety, the escape from a threatening feeling. Here is what this means for Marcus. Every time he seriously considers leaving his job to return to filmmaking, he experiences a cascade of anxiety. Financial fear, fear of failure, fear of being the guy who tried and couldn't, and fear that the talent was always smaller than the dream. This anxiety is real. It is not imaginary. It is a neurological event. And every time he backs away from that decision, Every time he tells himself, next year, when the timing is better, the anxiety decreases. His nervous system registers the retreat as relief, as safety, and what gets reinforced, over and over and over, is not the behavior of moving toward the thing. What gets reinforced is the behavior of not moving, of staying. Every retreat from change is neurologically experienced as a small rescue. This is the engine. This is the actual machine running most lives. Not fear of failure exactly, though that's in there, but the way the nervous system has learned, through thousands of repetitions, that staying produces relief and moving forward produces discomfort. The comfort isn't even particularly enjoyable anymore. It's just the known shape of discomfort versus the unknown shape of a different discomfort. And the brain, which is a prediction machine above all else, will almost always choose the devil it knows. But I want to be more precise than Skinner, because I think even his framework doesn't fully account for something I've seen play out in multiple lives, including my own. It's not just that change is uncomfortable. It's that change requires you to grieve the person you've been pretending to be. This is where the philosopher Albert Camus becomes relevant, and not in the way he's usually invoked. Not for the Sisyphus metaphor, not for the absurdist hashtag fodder. What matters here is something more specific from his notebooks, his journals, the unglamorous private writing. Camus understood that most people's deepest fear isn't that they're nothing. It's that there's something other than what they've been performing, that the person everyone knows, the identity that has been socially reinforced and personally cultivated for years or decades, might be a sophisticated piece of protective theatre, and that beneath the theatre is either something more frightening or something more alive, and they can't tell which, and the uncertainty alone is enough to hold them in place. Think about what change actually requires, specifically. Not change in the abstract, not becoming your best self, but the actual granular event of a person significantly redirecting their life. What it requires is that you look at the years you've already spent in the wrong direction and not flinch from them. That you tell the people around you, people who've known and loved the current version of you, that the current version was partly a performance you ran to survive something. That you accept a period of being nobody, of being in between identities, of not knowing who you are while the old thing is dying and the new thing hasn't arrived yet. That period, the in-between, is what people actually can't tolerate, and it's rarely discussed honestly in conversations about change because it doesn't photograph well and it doesn't fit the transformation narrative we've been sold. The transformation narrative skips the void. It goes from caterpillar to butterfly and treats the cocoon as decorative, when the cocoon is, in fact, the entire story. Inside the cocoon, the caterpillar doesn't just grow wings, it dissolves, completely, into an undifferentiated biological soup. What emerges on the other side is not the caterpillar with wings. It is something else, using material that was once the caterpillar. Most people get to the edge of dissolution and turn back. And I don't say that with contempt. I say it because I've turned back. Because I know what the edge of that dissolution feels like, not poetically, but in the body. It feels like vertigo. It feels like the particular loneliness of sitting in a life that's working on paper and knowing in the part of yourself that doesn't negotiate, that something has to die, and the thing that has to die is real. It accumulated real relationships, real history, real comfort. Grieving, it is not a small thing. It is one of the hardest things a person can do, while still appearing to the outside world as completely fine. I want to name the counter-argument now, because it deserves to be named. The most honest objection to everything I'm saying is this. People do change. There are documented cases everywhere. Addiction recovery, radical career pivots, people who exit abusive patterns they've been in for decades, people who genuinely build lives that look nothing like what they came from. The counter-argument is that I'm being a determinist dressed up as a philosopher, that I'm using the language of neuroscience to confirm a cynicism I already hold. And this objection is not wrong, exactly. It's just pointing at the wrong thing. I'm not arguing that change is impossible. I'm arguing that almost everything we've been taught about how it happens is wrong in ways that make it harder, not easier. We've been taught that change is primarily a cognitive event, that you understand something, decide something, and then that decision restructures your life. This is the self-help industrial complex's foundational myth, and it is wrong to the point of being harmful. It means that when the change doesn't stick, When the resolution dissolves, when you're back to the old pattern 6 weeks later, you conclude that there's something wrong with your discipline or your character. You conclude that you're the kind of person who doesn't change, and that conclusion becomes its own prison. What the evidence actually shows, from psychotherapy research, from addiction medicine, from the developmental psychology of adults, is that significant behavioral change almost always requires 3 things that are systematically undervalued: environmental restructuring, relational accountability, and the willingness to experience genuine negative emotion without immediately resolving it. Not thinking differently, not deciding differently, changing the actual physical and social environment in which the behavior is happening, attaching the change to another human being who will witness both the effort and the failure, and developing, slowly, painfully, what the psychologist Susan David calls emotional agility, which is essentially the capacity to feel a difficult feeling without immediately reaching for the nearest behavior that makes it stop. None of these 3 things is particularly inspiring to talk about. They don't lend themselves to quotes on a motivational poster. Environmental restructuring means that Marcus probably needs to literally leave New Jersey, or at minimum leave the pharmaceutical company, before he can return to filmmaking, not because geography is destiny, but because the environment is a continuous cue that activates the existing neural pathway. The office, the commute, the Wednesday lunch with colleagues who don't know about his documentary ambitions, these aren't neutral backgrounds. They are active architects, and they're building him every single day. And here is where I need to tell you about someone who actually did it, because I said failure is part of this, and it is, but the most instructive kind of failure is the kind that comes from the actual attempt. Her name is Diana. She was a healthcare administrator in her early 40s, well compensated and competent, hollowed out by work she had stopped believing in around 2016. She'd wanted, since her 20s, to be a ceramicist. Not as a hobby, as a vocation. She had the skill. She'd been doing it seriously for 15 years on weekends. At 43, she did something most people in her position only narrate to themselves as a fantasy. She quit. She cashed out a meaningful portion of her retirement savings, rented a small studio space, and gave herself 2 years to build a business. The first year, by her own description, was the most genuinely alive she'd felt since her early 20s. The second year, the savings ran out faster than projected. A gallery partnership fell through. She had to sell the studio. She moved in with her sister for 7 months. People in her former professional circle were simultaneously sympathetic, and she could feel it, quietly satisfied, because her failure confirmed the decision they had made not to try, and that confirmation is a specific social comfort people don't like to admit they take. By the time she'd stabilized, new job, smaller apartment, still making ceramics on a second-hand wheel in her kitchen, her net financial position was worse than before by a significant margin. And here is the part that matters. She does not regret it. Not as a performance. Not as a story she tells to make the risk feel justified. She is, in the most unadorned way I can describe, different. Not happier in the simple sense. Her life is materially harder. But the thing that used to crawl through her chest on Sunday evenings is gone. Something shifted inside her, at a cellular level, in the way that things shift when you do the true version of something instead of the rehearsed version. She found out what she was made of. She found out that she could survive the dissolution. And even though she's back in an administrative role, the role doesn't own her the way it once did. She is not the person who didn't try. That distinction, invisible to almost everyone around her, is everything to her. This is the thing I think we catastrophically misunderstand about the cost of not changing. We think it's passive. We think staying still is the neutral option, the safe harbor, the conservative bet. It is not. Staying still is an active choice made every day, and it exacts a specific, compounding cost. It's just that the cost is spread thin and arrives slowly, in increments too small to register as catastrophic in any given moment. It is the slow hemorrhage rather than the clean wound. You don't notice you've been bleeding until you've already lost most of what mattered. Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz and Dachau and lost nearly his entire family to the camps, spent the rest of his long life articulating something I think is relevant here, though it is not comfortable to acknowledge. What Frankl observed, not as a therapeutic platitude, but as a hard-won empirical finding from the most extreme conditions human beings have ever survived, is that the last of human freedoms, the one that cannot be stripped away even in the absolute worst of circumstances, is the freedom to choose one's attitude toward a given set of conditions, the freedom to choose one's own way. He watched prisoners in the camps who had nothing left, no dignity, no safety, no bodily autonomy, no certainty of survival for even another hour, and some of them chose, in ways both small and profound, to remain the authors of their own interior lives, to share their last piece of bread, to speak a kind word in the dark. I bring this up not to compare anyone's life to a death camp. That comparison would be obscene. I bring it up because Frankl's observation exposes something about the people who don't change that is very hard to sit with. If the freedom to choose remains available even there, then the argument that circumstances prevent most people from changing is not entirely honest. Some circumstances are genuinely prohibitive. Poverty is real. Trauma is real. The way systemic disadvantage constrains actual choices is real and measurable, and should not be dismissed. I am not talking about those people when I say what I'm about to say. I'm talking about the specific population. Large, likely including most people watching this, including me on certain weeks, who have enough. Enough safety, enough resources, enough time. People for whom the primary obstacle to change is not external conditions but the interior architecture of the self. For some people, the argument that circumstances are prohibitive is, more often than not, the most sophisticated form of self-deception available. It is not exactly a lie. It contains real elements of truth. The timing genuinely could be better. The financial situation genuinely could be more stable. The children genuinely do need certain things right now. But it is a lie in its function. Its function is to protect the person from the full weight of their own authorship. If circumstances are not the primary obstacle, the question becomes unbearable. What are you choosing and why? Here's what real change actually looks like, stripped of any romanticism. It doesn't look like a montage. It looks like Marcus, hypothetically, telling his wife for the third time in a month that he needs to talk about something serious, and then actually saying it out loud instead of veering at the last moment into safer conversational territory. It looks like the specific discomfort of that conversation, which will not resolve cleanly, which will produce more questions than answers, which will make Tuesday harder than Monday was. It looks like weeks when nothing is clear, nothing has momentum, and the old life has cracked, but the new one hasn't cohered, and the only thing available is the basic commitment to not retreat. Not because retreat is weak. Retreat is deeply human and deeply understandable, but because you've already done the accounting on what another 11 years of retreat actually costs. It smells like the specific anxiety of the morning after a real decision, before the narrative has formed around it. It tastes like the words you say to someone you care about when you're trying to be honest instead of impressive. It has the texture of not knowing, not as spiritual ambiguity but as genuine, ground-level not knowing what the next year is going to look like. The people who change don't generally report that it got easier. They report that they got different enough to stop needing it to be easy. I know what you're preparing to do with this. You can already feel it, the mechanism starting to translate this back into something manageable. You're going to find the piece of this that applies to someone else, someone you know who clearly needs to hear it. Or you're going to extract a useful framing and add it to the collection of useful framings you have, alongside the other things you've read, watched, and half applied. Or you're going to feel, genuinely and not performatively, a real resonance with what's been said here, and that resonance is going to feel enough like action that it briefly satisfies the part of you that knows something needs to change. And then the week will start, and the week will be what the week is. And by the following Sunday, you will have made, in aggregate, approximately 0 changes to the architecture of your actual daily life. This is not cynicism. This is the statistical baseline. Research on behavior change after a single exposure to even highly compelling content, a documentary, a powerful book, a deeply moving conversation, shows that vanishingly few people make durable changes as a result. The numbers are not inspiring. They suggest that information, even when it lands, even when it genuinely moves someone, has almost no power to restructure the behavioral and environmental patterns that govern a life. The knowledge of what needs to change is rarely the limiting factor. Almost everyone already knows. Knowing is not the problem, and knowing will not be the solution. So here is the actual question, and I want to give it the space it deserves. Not, do you want to change? Of course you do. Wanting is the easy part, essentially free. But what are you willing to lose? What specifically in your current life are you willing to let die? Which relationships are you willing to risk by being honest? What comfort are you willing to sit through the loss of? What version of yourself? The capable one, the reliable one, the one who has things mostly together. Are you willing to appear for a period of time, not to be, because that is the actual ante? Not discipline. Not motivation. Not the right strategy, system, or understanding of your own psychology, though those things matter in supporting roles. The ante is the willingness to endure genuine loss on the way to something true, with no guarantee that the thing on the other side will justify the loss in any way others can see. Diana's in a smaller apartment. She has less retirement savings. When she goes to her former colleagues' events, she can feel the particular quality of their sympathy. By several conventional metrics, she is worse off than she was. And she is not the person who didn't try. That's not a consolation prize. For her, it is the entire thing. But you don't have to believe it's worth it for you. That's a calculation you have to make with your actual life, not with the inspired version of yourself that exists in the 40 minutes after watching something like this. Most people never really change. Not because they're cowardly, not because they lack the right information, not because the circumstances never allowed it. Most people never really change because the specific, daily, granular cost of changing, the conversations, the grief, the dissolution, the void, is more than they're willing to pay, and the cost of staying, spread thin across decades, never arrives all at once in a way that forces the accounting. You are not most people, you'll think. And you might be right. The probability that you are the exception is not zero. But the probability is also not what you'd like it to be. Sunday is coming.